Welcome back to The Heat. Some U.S. lawmakers are upset that President Trump will allow U.S. companies to sell components to Chinese telecommunications company Huawei. Trump made the announcement at the G20 summit in Japan. In tweets, Senator Marco Rubio called the move a catastrophic mistake, and Senator Chuck Schumer said it will undercut our ability to change China's unfair trade practices. For more, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Beijing is Einar Tangen. He's a political and economic affairs commentator with CGTN America. Also with us from Austin, Texas is Matthew Bay. He's a senior global analyst at the intelligence firm Statfor. Einar, you've heard a lot of these criticisms, I'm sure. In fact, one senator from Wyoming had some pretty strong comments to make about this. He was speaking to NBC. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think Huawei is a threat to the national security of America. I know the president is a deal maker. He is working on this. I would not allow Huawei, certainly, into our country. He's making decisions about what our country and companies can sell overseas to Huawei. To me, Huawei in the United States would be like a Trojan horse ready to steal more information from us.
Pretty strong words, a threat, a Trojan horse. Give me your sense, Einar, what you make of these allegations.
Well, I think there's a lot of rhetoric, but the fact is that Huawei couldn't be copying the U.S., otherwise the U.S. wouldn't be 2 years behind in 5G. The fact is this is political. Peter Navarro came out and said, oh, we're not selling anything to Huawei that poses any kind of security threat. Of course, that begs the question of why it was banned in the first place on the grounds of national security.
What about this contention that Huawei is basically working for the Chinese government, beholden to the Chinese government? What do you make of that?
Well, you know, you can make any kind of allegation you want. You can say that, Microsoft is working for the U.S. government. Boeing is subsidized by the U.S. government. In fact, it is. These kinds of allegations need to be proven. There has to be some sense of it. There is a law that says that in China, if called upon by the government, corporations have to cooperate. But the question is, what do they have to cooperate with? And quite frankly, as we've seen with Snowden and other things, our government is quite interested in almost everything that goes on there and gets it legally or illegally.
Matthew, from the U.S. perspective, does the Trump administration have a case here?
I think it does to a certain degree. I mean, if you look at why the United States was considering even doing the export controls on Huawei, it's not just about national security concerns within the United States. It's about national security signs and overall U.S. policy. So we've had in the past Huawei, for example, being accused of taking U.S. technology, exporting it to Iran. So there are questions beyond just the domestic issue. And I definitely do think the United States has some concerns when we look at what Huawei is doing or what China can do to Huawei to force it to do compelling. I mean, to some degree, I kind of see the point here that, you know what, from Huawei's perspective, they are trying to fight a hypothetical. You do have the questions about whether or not what to degree the government will make them to comply with anything for intelligence purposes. But I think the United States' concern is that if you do have Chinese companies in the U.S. technology here in the United States, whether it be mobile networks, cell phones, et cetera, there's a concern that, you know, maybe right now China isn't doing anything, maybe right now Huawei isn't working with them, but the question is in the future, will they?
Yeah, Belgium Center for Cybersecurity has found no evidence that equipment supplied by Huawei could be used for spying. We're hearing that also from some folks in the UK. And yet the U.S. has this hypothetical, it could happen, it could happen. And as Einar said, anything could happen with Boeing and these other companies. How do you fight back against that if you're a company accused of what might happen?
So I don't think there really is a good strategy. I think that's the big problem here, because I mean, the U.S. companies have faced similar accusations when you look at, say, for example, Cisco investing into and supplying equipment to China. So I definitely think that it's not a good strategy or anything that they can possibly do, because I think if you look at the broader competition that's happening right now between the United States and China, the U.S. is starting to view China as more of a rising peer. It is looking at that long time horizon, saying, okay, you know what? China is now trying to rewrite global institutions, rewrite the way the global system works, rewrite and look at the United States as a potential adversary. Of course, China is going to step back and say, you know what, no, we're not doing that right now. But from the United States perspective, it cannot wait until it sees actions before it has, or see China make actions before it has to prepare for it in the future.
Einar, how would you respond to that?
Well, quite frankly, it's kind of guilty knowledge. You know, let's take something that is proven, and that is that the NSA was putting malware to create backdoors on hard drives back in the 70s and 80s, both Seagate and Micron. This gave them literally access to everything. You know, they admitted that in case of Huawei, that they were routinely intercepting phones and laptops and hard drives and reading them. So, you know, this idea that we're going to prevent industrial espionage and all this type of stuff by doing it ourselves, that only the United States can be trusted with this, when in fact we've seen by the many leaks out there that the U.S. has not handled cybersecurity responsibly. So this idea that, you know, we're holier than thou, it doesn't strike a good chord with China, nor do I think it's going to strike the right chord with the rest of the world.
I want to play a soundbite from the Huawei founder and CEO, Ron Zhengfei. This is what he had to say about the company, and I want to get your response on the other side. Let's listen.
Over the past 30 years, we have developed business in more than 170 countries, proven that Huawei's network is safe and seldom breaks down. As for the question about whether our equipment has backdoors, the answer is 100% no. We are willing to sign no backdoor agreements with any country.
Matthew, they're willing to go on the record. Einar, they're willing to go on the record. Why don't I start with you, Einar? Is that enough for the U.S.?
Well, apparently not. I mean, any kind of reassurance. I mean, as I said, when you're willing to do something, you think everyone else is willing to do the same thing. No country is going to accept assurances. I mean, this is the nature of misinformation. But, you know, I don't know how you resolve this, making kind of hypothetical allegations, saying that you might do this, so therefore you can't be trusted, when in fact, the real issue here is that the U.S. lost a step. We're 2 years behind Huawei, and that's really the issue here. It's not that we suspect they're doing things, it's just we believe that because they have a superiority in a leading technology that we ignored for too long, that they might use it the way we would use it.
Matthew, what about that, that the U.S. finds themselves in the rearview mirror, they want to catch up? Is that part of what's going on here?
I think to a degree it is. I mean, if you look at the United States, it really doesn't have a lot of equipment vendors in the telecom industry anymore. So I think there's an element of it, but I do think that there is a legitimate concern about the security long-term from the United States. I think that is where it is at. I don't think that it is the idea from the Trump administration that it is that America First policy of boosting U.S. manufacturing, boosting U.S. competitiveness in the areas that Huawei is. I just don't think that that's the way that they're viewing this particular issue.
You know, it's interesting, though, talking to Andy Purdy, you know, in 2010, the Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Center was put into place in the UK. And really, they can look at any piece there, the security officials in the UK. You've got this assurance from Ron Zhengfei, no backdoor agreements, we'll sign them with any country. Is there any more that they can do to try and reassure the U.S. that this really isn't something to be concerned about?
No, I don't think there really is much more they can do, and I think that's the real challenge here is that as long as the United States, I mean, the U.S. has all the leverage here. If the U.S. says no, the answer is no. So I think that, you know, having a compliance program, negotiating over that, maybe asking or trying to get Beijing to intercede on their behalf, which in some cases in the United States would actually be looked upon frowned upon, excuse me. So I do think that that's the kind of strategy that they have to employ, but I don't think, just given the broader geopolitical competition between the U.S. and China, that that's going to be enough.
Einar, I want to ask you about the G20 and the response there in Beijing at Donald Trump saying, look, we'll allow some sales to go forward. How is that being viewed there?
Well, with caution. I mean, Donald Trump is not exactly known for steering a steady course. On any given day, he can make one tweet and then deny it, literally his own words, a few hours later, or call it fake news. So, you know, and in his personal, business, and political life, he has not exactly been Mr. Reliable. So I think Beijing is going slowly. They're going to see what happens as opposed to just the verbiage. Obviously, there is a desire on China's part to strike some sort of deal with the U.S. They're not interested in see who loses most kind of zero-sum game tariff war.
Matthew, what about blowback here on Capitol Hill? I mean, we're hearing from Chuck Schumer, he's not happy about this. Marco Rubio, not happy about it. How does that play into this equation, especially with this being an election year?
So I think that's the big concern for President Trump moving forward is, what is his election campaign strategy with respect to China? Is it he's going to say, hey, look, I'm the one who created some sort of a deal with China. I was the first one to do that. Or can he also then fall upon the fact that if the talks fall apart, hey, I've been hard on China, I put on place tariffs on China, etc. But the point being is if he does sign some sort of a strike in a card that he can't sell to the American public and he cannot sell to U.S. Congress, that could actually undermine his chances, especially when you see some of the Democrats like Biden, for example, who has been notorious for being pretty hard on China, relatively speaking. Moving forward, though, I think another critical thing to think about is whether or not Congress takes the Huawei hand out of his hands, or the Huawei issue, out of his hands. There is a question of whether or not they will try to write some of these export controls into U.S. law, and at that point, Trump might be unable to strike that accord. They threatened to do so, for example, last year when we saw a similar ban put into place against Chinese tech company ZTE. So that is something that I think is still an option on the table.
Einar, how would that be viewed in Beijing?
Well, I mean, the hostility that they see on both sides of the article, I mean, both sides of the aisle, seems to be going on beyond the kind of election year punching bag that China usually assumes the role of. And there is real concern, but they feel they're battling an international press that is vilifying China on almost a daily basis. If you go back to when Trump became president, you'll see a steady pattern where all of a sudden China is at the butt of a negative number of stories almost on a daily basis, causing aspersions towards it. And for a lot of people in China, they're starting to wonder if this is just a no-win situation, that the U.S. has decided that China wears the black hat and that this is going to be a showdown at the OK Corral.
And so, Einar, one final question for you then. This level of mistrust, can it be erased? Can there be a trade deal? What's the future for Huawei?
Well, I think it can. I don't know if it can be done with this administration. I think Donald Trump would like to see a deal just before the election to increase his popularity, so he could claim that he tamed China, that he solved the deficit. This would, of course, be a big boon to him. It would send the markets up very radically. The question is, 1 year from now, is that option going to be on the table?
Well, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter, Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.